on the introductory slide, this is an introduction to professional registration, which I'm hoping those of you here will at least know is an accreditation scheme by the Science Council for people in technical roles, be that technicians, research associates, experimental officers, research assistants, etc. Okay, this is one of two sessions, and I'll break down the first session in a minute, but to suffice to say that for Science Council professional registration, there are 4 registers, 3 of which, RSci Tech, RSci and CSci, we will be defining this morning and talking about in the context of the application in both this session and the next session. I'll mention in passing, as it's on the screen, that there is actually another register called CSci Teach, but this is primarily focused on secondary science school teachers. So unless there are any teachers here today, and feel free to let Sarah know if there are in the chat, we're going to focus, all of my comments will address the 3 aforementioned registers. The other thing I'll say at the outset is I consider this the beginning of our mutual journey, not the end. So my object with today and indeed next Monday's session is to prime you in terms of what registration is, the benefits thereof, delineate the 3 registers, and then next week in particular talk about the most onerous part of the application, which is actually to fill out the competency form. And we'll touch on that, we'll at least introduce that today, but we're going to actually dissect that, appraise that in a lot of detail in next Monday's session. That's the primary purpose of next Monday's session. So if you have any questions regarding what I talk about today, those of you attending next week, feel free to drop me a line at my Science Council email address. So I am something called an applicant support mentor for the Science Council, and I'm actually giving this talk in that capacity for MI Talent. So today is really a little bit about me. Why am I the person giving the session today? Okay, what is my street credibility in that regard? What is professional registration? I'm going to put it in a general context. Then I'm going to give you an overview, a delineation of the competencies. So just an introduction to the different themes that comprise or constitute the competencies. We're going to frame that very briefly in the context of something called the technician commitment, and professional registration is accreditation, which is synonymous with pillar 2 of the commitment. Why bother to professionally register? So we're going to talk about the benefits of professional registration, and then we're going to take a 5 or 10-minute break. Depending on the time, we may modulate how long we take for the break. And really in the last part, what we're going to do is delineate the 3 registers. What constitutes a typical profile, for example, of an RSci Tech vis-a-vis RSci vis-a-vis CSci. We're then going to talk a little bit about the mechanics of the application via the Common Application Portal, or CAP. And an integral part of that is joining something called a license body, and we'll talk more about that as we go along. So really, as it's a 2-hour session, I would actually ask you to keep your mic on mute while I talk now, so there's no background noise. But to some extent, it should be guided by what you want. If you have any burning questions throughout this session, feel free to either come off mute and actually ask them, or if you like, you can put any questions you have, which is normally what candidates prefer, in chat, and Sarah will keep an eye on the chat for me and relay the questions that you ask at specific points in the presentation. Okay, and as Sarah said, the session is being recorded. So what I'd like you to do now, and Sarah can relay these to me because I can't see chat, is why do you want to personally register? So if you want to put your name in the chat and essentially a sentence or two as to what brought you here. Okay, so what are you hoping to get from this session, and indeed professional registration itself. So if we allow you about 2 minutes to populate the chat, and then I'm going to sort of keep quiet, and Sarah's going to relay your seminal points to me. So if I can pass over to you then, Sarah, and I'll stay quiet for a couple of minutes while people populate the chat.
Yeah, absolutely, Lawrence. So I'll just give people a minute to type quickly what was the main motivation for them coming to the workshop today. So we're getting some comments through, Lawrence. So so from Dan, employee recognition of specialist knowledge, skills and experience. Technical manager on the call wants to find out how members of her team can become registered so that we can better advise them. Explore how registration can benefit career progression. Another one, acknowledgement of experience in my job for reward and recognition. Evidence of skills and experience. Somebody's written this, so I'm sure this might be true of a few people, wondering about professional registration for a while, but not sure quite what's involved. Difficulty getting accreditation because of my broad background, as if you have a degree in one area but working and research in another. Recognition of skills for myself and other members of my team. And if people are thinking of similar things, obviously you can like other people's comments as well. So there's a couple of other things. Main motivation is to get recognition for experience, to also boost confidence, find out more about it in general, how to help staff, having a formal accreditation, because somebody has an accreditation from Germany but not UK equivalent. Career progression. So we can see some themes emerging now around career progression, helping the team, interested in finding out more, and how does it compare to other accreditations such as HEA fellowship. Is that okay, Lawrence? Does that give you enough of a flavour?
It does. Let me just say that the seminal points have been made, I think to an extent are self-evident, and therefore in putting this presentation together, I think pretty much I've addressed all of them. I'm not sure I'm going to have time to go into the fellowship versus professional registration, but what I'd say to people is at the end of this session at about 12 o'clock, if you feel there are still burning questions that haven't been answered today, and you anticipate if you're coming next week may not be answered next week, then as I say, feel free to drop me a line at my Science Council email address, and I'm sure Sarah can actually put that into the chat. Okay. So let me say a little bit about me. So I am somebody, as I say, I'm an applicant support mentor for the Science Council, and in that regard, for the Science Council, and also on loan to organisations like NTDC and Midlands Innovation, I give the sort of workshop, in fact, I give the workshop and the one that's being run next week on behalf of those organisations. In addition, however, my role, based on my own volition, is a little bit more holistic than that. So I actually attend trade shows for different organizations. I speak at technical conferences in a similar vein to how I'm speaking today. But the other thing I do is I've put together some learning materials, such as the one sort of given here, which is a professional registration Padlet that's linked to the National Technician Development Centre, NTDC website. And at the end of this talk, I've actually given you a series of links to this support material. Okay, so if you get a copy of this talk, you will also have access to links that give you additional material, plus obviously the theme of today. And I actually carry out these activities, as I've just said, in the context of the Science Council, Midlands Innovation, which is why I'm here today, National Technician Development Centre, and also Royal Society of Biology. Okay, and the other thing I suppose that I should mention, which is seminal, is the fact that I'm actually an assessor for professional registration, in addition to someone that promulgates these workshops for the organisations mentioned. Okay, so as such, I will say to you, I will avail myself in terms of what I refer to as aftercare. So I basically prime you today, and then going forward, you can contact me with your own questions, okay? To the extent that, time permitting, I will actually, if necessary, proofread your competency answers, which is the mainstay of your application, as we'll come on to in a little while, and we'll dissect in great detail next Monday, okay? So when I do that, effectively, I'm wearing my assessor's hat. So I can tell you, based on the construction of your competency answer, if the theme is correct, does it meet the competency objectives? And moreover, is it written in a way that assessors will deem as being sort of up to scratch? As a result of the work that I do, I've won a series of awards in the last 5 years. And in addition, I hold a fellowship with the Royal Society of Biology based on the work that I do for them in this regard, and the work that I do out with the Royal Society of Biology. And similarly, I hold a fellowship with an organisation called the IST that some of you may have heard of, and we'll come back to in the context of licensed bodies in a while, okay? Because formerly, in addition to the organisations I've just mentioned, I was the assistant registrar for the IST and did similar things for them that I've already mentioned in the context of Science Council, MI Talent and NTDC. So my actual background is I'm actually a technician myself. I have about 35 years experience. I've worked internationally as well as throughout the UK, and my own specialist discipline is life sciences. So at the moment, I'm a core research and teaching technician at the University of Leicester. I wanted to introduce this, okay, because I wanted to make a seminal point at the outset, which is this. I became a registered scientist, as it shows there, in 2017, but I quickly transitioned to becoming a chartered scientist in November of 2017. And there's a couple of points I want to make in that regard, okay? One is the fact that there's no sort of time limit on when you can transition. You can do it once you have, for example, one particular register. If you decide you want to upgrade, once that's been approved by the licensed body in association with the Science Council, you could literally do it the next day if you so wished. The reason I transitioned quite quickly is because, in fact, I realized in retrospect that, in fact, I was actually a chartered scientist, and we'll come on to profiles in relation to those in a little while. I thought, because I'm not actually a technical manager, I'm not a team leader, that precluded me from becoming a chartered scientist. Okay. And what I'd say in that regard is it's not, when you apply for professional registration, it's about your experience. It's not totally about your education level. It's about what you do in your job. It isn't about what your job title says you are. So as long as through your day-to-day, week-to-week job, you can satisfy the tenets of the competencies that we're going to define at least today, then that makes you eligible, for example, to become a chartered scientist. Okay, I'll talk a little bit more about the overall sort of application criterion in a little while. But don't think that, I guess the seminal point I want to make is, don't think because you're not a team leader and chartered scientist is more of a management qualification. If you don't have manager in your job title, but you are actually conducting different types of management skills that I will define in addition, apart from being an actual team leader, that I will define specifically later in the talk, that does not stop you from becoming a chartered scientist. And the one other thing I'd say while I'm on this slide, because it seems apt, is if you do transition from one register to another in a certain time frame, for example, in my case, registered to chartered scientist, you can actually incorporate a lot of the material that is in your original application and then add on to that. You don't need to reinvent the wheel de novo. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try and play you two videos which are by the Science Council and by the Water Board, which talk about professional registration briefly and why become professionally registered. I have to apologise. Sarah and I tried to get these full screen this morning and it hasn't proved possible. So what I'd say is, as long as you can see it, but more particularly, as long as you can actually hear the actual talk, that's really the most important thing. So I'm going to start with this introduction to professional registration by the Science Council, and this is about 2 minutes long.
Scientists don't all spend their time hidden away in labs gazing down their microscopes. The reality is very different. Scientists and science technicians in a variety of professional roles are becoming increasingly important across all sectors of the UK economy and society. According to our research, over 1.3 million people in science roles make up 5% of the entire UK workforce. This means that it's crucial to understand as much as possible about how and where science skills are being used and how this might evolve in the future. Here at the Science Council, we support the professional practice of science at all levels and across the whole economy. We feel strongly that everyone working in science should have one thing in common: a shared commitment to professional values that unite practicing scientists. Professional registration recognises the work they're doing to shape science for our future world.
Okay, and I'll quickly transition to this video by the Water Board, which talks about, in the context, let's say, of analytical chemists working at the Water Board, what they feel professional registration is about. Why become professionally registered?
Professional registration is a mark of excellence. Our clients are reassured that we work to the highest possible standards and quality, and they have trust in the work that we do. I think professional registration really helps me stand out from a crowd. It helps me build my confidence.
Becoming registered gave me the opportunity to get recognition for the knowledge and skills that I've developed over the period of my career. It made me feel valued. It made me feel like the things that I've achieved in my career have been recognised formally, and it's widely recognised by employers as well. I also had a mentor during the process. They were able to give me some really good advice and tips on what to include in my application, things that I haven't even thought of myself.
After becoming professionally registered, I went back to my team. I encouraged them to become professionally registered. I offered them the support, and I would mentor them from start to finish right through the program. For me, mentoring has been a natural progression, and it's really helped me develop myself and challenge myself going forward.
It is a tough process, but that's why it's an achievement when you do get registered scientist. I'd say get involved in as many projects as you can, allowing you to demonstrate leadership, good communication, good organisation in the application. That's really going to help you.
Okay, so you noticed that there were certain buzzwords like recognition, gaining confidence, and these are synonymous, as they were saying at the Water Board, with reasons why people become professionally registered, and we'll revisit those systematically in the next few slides. But the other thing I want to make clear at this juncture is the fact that professional registration is not an academic qualification. It's not about looking at your background knowledge. It's about technical knowledge in one regard, which is synonymous with competency A, as we'll define in a second, and to some extent updates on that knowledge and different modes of practice, which is D. But it's also, as the guy that looked like Eddie Redmayne in the video talked about. It's about planning and organization. It's about what you bring to the job in general, because obviously working in a lab is not just about your own personal bench work and your relationship with your supervisor and prioritizing that, although that is a crucial aspect, and you talk about that in your competency form, in that case competency B. It's also about how you train others, communication, competency C, as we'll come on to. It's about how you adhere to professional standards, equality, diversity, okay, how you deal perhaps with clinical samples, different types of standards. So it's looking at you in the round. It's about how you actually prosecute your role in all respects, as opposed to looking at specifically your academic knowledge. So it's quite different from an academic qualification. And we'll come on to one of the questions that I'm often asked, which is, I have a PhD, so do I need to become a chartered scientist? And I think the implication of what I've said is potentially yes, because they're two different propositions. But I'll talk more about that in a subsequent slide. The other thing I'd say is, of course, if you get a copy of this talk, you can see that I've provided actual YouTube link URLs within the presentation. So you can go back, look at the material, watch the videos at your own leisure. One thing actually that was brought out by the Water Board is mentoring. And let me just say that I will avail myself to talking to you as individuals if you contact me via your email address, and I will advise you on the specifics of your own application. And we talk more about that. That's synonymous with the competency form, and we basically appraise and dissect that more next Monday. Okay, but let me just say as well, because I think this was brought up in the initial questions, someone talked about getting their team to actually professionally register, and that is about mentoring within your team. And let me just say that if you don't have an in-house mentor, feel free to contact me, not just for yourself, but on behalf of other people in your team. I'm basically mentoring, for example, a lot of technicians at the Sanger Centre at the moment, and I'm doing it via their managers. But I will avail myself to the individual members of your team. If you want to pass on that email address I gave at the second, and I think Sarah's probably put in the chat, which I cannot see, and they can contact me individually as well. So I will try and make this as seamless as I can and offer as much aftercare support as you feel is necessary.
Lawrence, can you just give me your email address, because I haven't put it in the chat because I've been emailing you at Leicester. So just repeat it and I'll type it as we go. Yeah,
so it's l.dawkins-hall@sciencecouncil.org.
Yeah, thank you.
Have you got that, Sarah?
Sorry, yes.
Okay, so what we're going to do now is I'm actually going to take a snapshot. Some of you, I'm sure, based on the fact that this is a national scheme and you may know people who are professionally registered, some of you may know which register you think you are. Many of you here, however, I'm sure, will say not sure. So I just want to take a snapshot of where you think you lie, and in particular how big the not sure column D is. Okay, and I'm actually going to revisit this poll towards the end of the session when we've talked about or delineated the registers. And obviously the object of that exercise is for me to see if I've done my job correctly, that the actual magnitude of the column in the histogram for D goes down. So I'm going to take you into a Slido poll, and hopefully you should be able to go on to slido.com, type in that code, or if you have a phone, you can scan that QR code, and that should enable you to actually register. If you think you know your register, take a plug. If you're not sure, obviously put a tick in the not sure column. So I'm going to sit back for 2 minutes whilst you actually log on to Slido, or you scan the QR code and you actually vote. Sarah?
Yep.
How many people are actually here? Because I can see the number of people voting. Just to give me an idea of when everyone has voted. What number?
26.
26. So we have at the moment 19 that have voted. Okay. So when we hit 26, I'll carry on. Okay, my poll on my presentation screen is saying 26 have voted. And not surprisingly, which is probably one reason necessarily you're here today, many of you aren't sure. Obviously, an object of today is to define the three registers. So at the end, you hopefully have a clearer idea, and correspondingly that not sure column will go down. But let me just reiterate, if you're still not sure about things like what register you are, contact me, send me your CV, and usually I can look at a CV and within 2 minutes tell you which register I think you should pitch for. In that context, I will also say that my aftercare will include things like, if needs be, looking at your competency answers and proofreading them and letting you know, wearing my assessor's hat, if they pass muster. I keep saying that because I want to reiterate that I'm priming you now, but this is not the end of our mutual journey. So why register? So professional registration with the Science Council provides independent recognition of your achievements, okay, and maintaining exact standards required to join a global community of professional scientists. Okay, to me, that reads, that's a statement by the Science Council verbatim. I think it reads a little bit like a marketing statement. I've never known whether to change that. So essentially, if we put that in more prosaic, more simple terms, you will be assessed, your competency form, which I keep talking about, will be assessed by two independent scientists, fellow technicians or scientific managers, okay, who are usually STEM. They may not share your particular subject knowledge, okay, so this has implications for how you write your competency form, and I'll come back to that particularly in the second session, but they will be fellow scientists, okay, and they will work independently. There's two assessors who work blind, and they both have to concur on the veracity of your answers, okay. And the idea with professional registration is because necessarily it addresses all technical scientists, the competencies are very generic, as you'll see. So, for example, whether you're an engineer working for Shell, whether you're an archaeologist working at Exeter University, or whether you're a team leader working as a molecular biologist, okay, the competencies are the same. They're written in a way that is applicable, hopefully, to all primarily STEM scientists. I'll make the proviso that the way this is set up, I think, tends to disenfranchise technicians who are non-STEM. In other words, creative arts technicians, lighting technicians, theatre technicians. There is, however, as I'll come on to, a separate register that's actually promulgated by the arts councils that you can actually register through. So this is a scheme primarily for STEM technicians, but those who aren't STEM, if there are any here today who are not STEM, there is actually a separate register that you can join. And the reason for professional registration is historically there's been an absence of accreditation for technicians, all right? So Traditionally, accreditation was really about whether, for example, in an academic setting, you got your name on papers. Outside academia, publications are not the main currency. And so over the years, their technicians, and in fact, I'm an example of this, have tended to get stuck at a particular grade. Whereas, for example, if you go on and you get a PhD and you use that PhD to pursue an academic career, now many technicians, for their own reasons, have PhDs. But if you are somebody with a PhD that pursues an academic career, there is at least a possibility that you will have some sort of career structure. And I think hitherto that's been absent in the main for technicians, particularly in academia, more than industry, it has to be said. And so the idea with professional registration is it provides recognition, it validates your skills via your competency case studies, your competency scenarios that we'll dissect particularly next week, as I keep saying, okay, but that is actually subsumed within a wider technician commitment, the object of which is to provide better career structures for technicians. As I've said before, the mainstay of the application, the validation of your skills, is done through a written report. And these skills, knowledge and behaviours, KSBs, to use a common acronym, are basically your technical skills, your knowledge, organisation, your communication and professional practice and professionalism. So as we'll come on to in a second, there are 5 competency themes. And in the context of the report, they are broken down into sub-competencies. So the overall form that you will fill out in your own time comprises something like 16 sub-competencies from A to E in total. And those competencies, we're going to talk a little bit more about that later and also next week. They are derived from practices primarily from the last 3 to 5 years. Although if you're doing something now that's rooted in an antecedent that you did longer than that, then it's okay to talk about things that you did prior to 5 years ago, as long as they have bearing on a practice that you're carrying out now. The other thing I'll say, and I'll reiterate in a while, is that many technicians are on contracts. So it could be that you have 2 jobs within the last 5 years, and it's okay to mix and match competencies from 2 jobs. And we'll talk more about that as we go on, and in particular next week. Okay. And this, in the context of professional registration, as I've said, and overall the technician commitment is meant to or aspires to provide a framework that supports career progression. So we keep talking about competencies, okay, and as I've already alluded to, there are 5 competencies: application of knowledge and understanding, personal responsibility, interpersonal skills, professional practice and professionalism. And it's these 5 themes that we will dissect primarily in next Monday's session. So I would actually say to you, if you're thinking of registering soon, which will involve you obviously putting together your competencies, attend next week's session if you haven't already signed up. So let's just put a little bit of flesh on those themes, just to introduce them now. So the application of knowledge and understanding is to some extent self-evident, okay? So it's about devising, adapting, researching, working up and troubleshooting methods, okay? It's about what you do at the bench. It's your technical knowledge. So it's your opportunity to shine and talk shop. But it doesn't necessarily have to be just wet bench science. It can be, for example, as we'll talk more about next week in particular, it can be literature searches in order to work up a method, okay? Acquiring knowledge through journals or online resources such as ResearchGate, okay? It can also be things like journal clubs, using your knowledge to actually appraise in a paper, all right? So we are going to talk much more about that another time. So this is really to give you a flavour of what constitutes those 5 competencies. Personal responsibility is about how you manage your time vis-a-vis your own project work, but it may be as well that as a technician that you're training others. Many technicians, in addition, both in industry and university, they actually manage and organise labs, maintain equipment on behalf of others. So it's all these aspects that come in, okay? Not just about your personal project work and how you meet deadlines, although as a minimum, that is something you'll probably talk about in competency B. It's about how, for example, you manage the lab, how you maintain the equipment, maybe your stock taking and ordering. So talk about your different responsibilities and how you juggle those responsibilities, okay? There is as well a section on standards in B, and generally people talk about their interaction with COSH. So, for example, as an RSI Tech, which is the most junior register, and we'll define these more in a minute, it may be that you're following a COSH form, okay, as part and parcel of carrying out a procedure in a basically a health and safety compliant way, GLP, good laboratory practice. It could be that as an RSI, which is a slightly more senior technician with 2 years experience, and we'll come on to this, that in addition to your own work, and that may be carrying out bench science involving analytical platforms, that you're actually training others. And if you are training others in today's world, that isn't just about imparting a standard operating procedure, the exigencies of the science, how to actually prosecute a technique accurately and consistently. It's about the health and safety that goes with that, waste disposal management, okay, practicing your particular technique safely in the field or in the lab, okay. Interpersonal skills and communication is about communicating with specialists and non-specialists in the context of training, problem solving. So, for example, communicating with specialists. Specialist means somebody that share your subject knowledge. So a typical scenario for that is as an RSI or as a CSI, you may be training others in the context of that operating procedure and the associated health and safety, okay? But in a job, we all communicate with many types of people. So let me give you an example of a non-specialist as opposed to a specialist training. So it's not uncommon for people as an RSI Tech or RSI or indeed CSI to communicate with medical reps at companies. Perhaps they're stock taking and ordering and they need to speak to people about supplies and supply problems. That's an example of communicating with a non-specialist. In a similar vein, if you are responsible for maintaining an analytical platform, a piece of equipment linked to generating the data associated with yours or indeed other people's work, maybe you maintain those platforms on behalf of others as part and parcel of your remit of actually looking after a lab in addition to prosecuting your own research, okay? Then these things are complex, so necessarily they tend to go wrong. So you might, at some point in your career, have to talk to engineers, okay? Now that is technical language because you're talking about the analytical platform, but the engineer has a background in engineering and may not share your specific background in, let's say, molecular biology, which you're using the platform for. So that's a non-specialist communication modality. The other thing that you'll talk about is the actual modalities themselves. So communication in a specialist sense, for example, might involve presenting using PowerPoint in lab meetings or departmental seminars, giving updates. So you can sort of invoke the fact that you're using a specialist package, you're using PowerPoint in addition to an oral presentation, okay. By extension, maybe as an RSI or as a CSI, which are slightly more senior, you are presenting at conferences. That may be oral presentation, maybe you're giving a talk, or maybe you're using Adobe Acrobat to basically put together some sort of poster pertaining to your work that you stand by. We've all been there in academia, and actually talk about what the research you're doing is. So this really sort of encapsulates different types of interpersonal skills and communication. Professional practice is applying, updating, scoping and managing projects, be that for the lab, be that departmental. So let me give you a flavour of that. For an RSci tech, which is somebody, as I'll talk about, with 1 year's experience, it could be that apart from organising the lab, which you talk about in competency B, you're focused on generating data. But it may be that one of the non-specialist constituencies or audiences you talk to is actually medical reps. They come to labs, they say, look, try our equipment, okay, try our columns, let's say, for purifying DNA. They're cheaper, they're quicker. So that's an update to a method, okay? So that's about scoping a sort of update to an existing method. As a CSI, which is a more managerial role, it could be that you're actually working up alternative methods from scratch, involving literature searches that you can talk about in A. And you're doing that to basically improve how the data is generated or expedite how the data is generated, okay? As a CSI as well, if you are a team leader, and many CSIs are, as I've said before, if you're not a team leader, it doesn't preclude you from applying. It could be that you have roles outside of the lab. As a team leader, it's likely you're not meant to be lab-based. So it may be that you're involved with estates and services, structural renovations of the labs, okay? Maintaining warranties for machines, bringing in new machines and arranging for those to actually be get up and running. This is something typically as a scientific team leader or as a chief technician that you will do, okay? So you can talk about those updates in terms of scoping and planning a project. Finally, let me just say that in the context of all three registers, it may be that you're dealing with finances if you're buying in consumables. And in particular for RSci and CSci, it might be that you have a consumables budget and you deal with directly with finance to make sure that basically you're balancing the books, okay? So that's clearly talking to people in accounts that do not share your scientific knowledge. So a constituency audience like that would exemplify non-specialist communication. And as I say, we'll talk more about this in a lot more detail next Monday.
Lawrence, can I just make a quick comment? There's been a comment, sort of stroke question in the chat.
Yes.
One of our participants is saying some of the technicians that she manages will struggle to demonstrate evidence for A, because it's a diverse team with a number of generalists who support research by keeping the core infrastructure running smoothly, but aren't actually at the bench themselves. And I just wondered if you had a comment that you wanted to make about that.
Yeah, I often find that team leaders who are in offices are scared by competency A because they're not actually prosecuting wet bench science themselves. And the scenario you've painted is analogous. I haven't actually got time, I would say, to go into that now. It is a common theme, and it may be in the future. Well, I'll certainly address it next week. So if that person hasn't signed up for next week, then please sign up. And that's something I will talk about a little bit more. But suffice to say, I'm making the same point here. If they want to email me with their particular descriptions of what these people do, I think it is usually possible to actually put together some sort of answer for the application of knowledge, basically the application of knowledge and understanding, which is different from actually carrying out wet-based bench science. I haven't given specifics, but does that at least give you an idea that this is something that we can resolve going forward?
Yeah,
Yes,
thanks. Yeah.
No problem. Please sign up next week if you haven't done already.
I can't. I have signed up, but I'm going to have to listen to the recording because I have other commitments that I won't be able to shift.
Great. Okay. Well, then it's a good job we're offering the recording. So the final competency is codes of conduct and practice. That's E1. And the second subcompetency for E is basically CPD. So CPD, I think we're all aware of, but I'll come back to that. But E1, in terms of code and conduct and practice, it's similar to D, but normally in E1, you talk about things like if you're attending mandatory training on, for example, equality and diversity or data protection. That's the sort of thing. We're all meant to attend these mandatory courses. And that's the sort of thing that you can talk about with reference to competency E1, codes of conduct and practice. But really, as I say, it's meant to be generic. So there are no right and wrong answers for competencies, okay? This is not physics. It's not either or, okay? It's not derived from first principles with absolutes. Anything that you feel can be made to fit, for example, codes of conduct and practice that you're adhering to or that you've taken on board can be included in this answer. And so, for example, that might include the Human Tissue Act if you're training up to actually deal in an anonymous way with patient samples. That as well can also be included in D, okay? So there is some overlap between competencies A and D and E. And it doesn't matter how you permute your answers or whether you take the same answer and recontextualize it for different subcompetencies, okay? It's up to you how you write this report, as long as you meet the mission statements, the objectives of the competency, okay? So when you look at the support materials, pay careful attention to the bootstrap statements associated with competencies. And the one thing I haven't mentioned is the fact that there's nothing like seeing an actual real competency form. And there are examples of that on the Science Council website. But I am prepared to avail myself, or should I say send you my own RSci and CSci competency reports. Keep in mind that my own specialist subject is life sciences, but I think even for people outside life sciences, because this is generic, if you have a look at what I've written, you should be able to deduce the sorts of things as a non-life scientist that you can include in that particular competency or subcompetency thereof, if it's still ambiguous. But drop me a line and I should be able to help you nevertheless. Continuing professional development is really about how you improve your practice within your job. Okay, it's continuing, it's developing your professional conduct. So that may be work-based learning, secondments, in-house experiential learning, in-service training. It can be formal educational, writing articles, attending training courses, obtaining vocational qualifications. Okay. Professional activity, that may be presenting at a conference for a licensed body, okay? Self-directed learning is reading journals, working up your knowledge, for example, to actually practice a particular thing. So that is something, as I say, that you can talk about in competency A as well, because it's the application of knowledge and understanding. And then other is strategic work, community work, and transferable skills. And this, for example, continuing professional development may, for example, be synonymous with becoming professionally registered. It may be that you're involved with other initiatives such as Athena Swan, equality and diversity. OK, these are all things that develop you professionally. I just want to talk a little bit about registration renewal in passing. So what actually happens is you put in your competency form, you hopefully with support from me or as part of the formal framework, your actual assessors, you will obtain your post-nominals, your RSci Tech, RSci CSci. And after 1 year, you need to renew your registration, okay? And that involves putting together a CPD submission of about 50 hours. But it's not a competency report. As we'll talk more about next week, the competency report is about 15 to 25,000 words, depending on the register. So it can be 30 pages of A4, Whereas putting together your CPD submission, okay, at the end of your first year to keep yourself on the register, that involves demonstrating particular CPD activities. And usually my CPD submissions, for example, are about 7 pages long to actually talk about those different categories of CPD, amounting to 50 hours in 1 year. So it's a lot less than the competency report. Okay. And I'm also making the point that involving yourself with the licensed body in other ways can actually facilitate registration renewal. It's veritable CPD that you can actually incorporate into your CPD report 1 year hence, and thereafter going forward every year to stay on the register. Briefly, each competency that I've talked about is broken down into 1,000 words, and there are 3 to 4 subcompetencies for A to D, 2 for E, and they must be autobiographical and also include outputs. Okay, so things that have actually worked, and we'll talk more about that next week. They can be from the last 5 years, and they can actually be mixed and matched from 2 jobs. If, for example, you feel one job you did 2 years ago lends itself to certain type of competencies more than your present job. It can include unpaid work in a professional environment. So that can be an internship. If, for example, you are a graduate that's done an intercalated year in a professional lab, that would mean at the end of that, you can actually apply for, let's say, RSI Tech. You don't have to actually then accrue 1 further year of experience. PhD studies are essentially a job with additional study on top. So your PhD can count towards either a registered scientist or a CSI award, but not an MSc. Any project associated with an MSc essentially is done in such a way that it's designed to illustrate principles. It isn't the same as actually working within a professional lab on something new. So MSc projects unfortunately cannot be used as part and parcel of your time served for your particular register. And let me just say that professional registration is pillar 2, which is recognition of the technician commitment. Okay. But there are other types of recognition, such as recognition as, say, an author on a paper. Okay, so it's about all of the types of recognition, but there tends to be an emphasis on professional registration as being synonymous with pillar 2. So visibility is actually the first part of the technician commitment. And as I've said, the ethos of the technician commitment is to translate things like recognition, visibility, sustainability, and career development into a better career for technicians. So if we look at visibility, that can be getting involved with licensed bodies, particular technical groups. Women in Tech is a group associated with the Institute of Science and Technology, but it can also be things like, once you're professionally registered, actually getting involved with a licensed body at their conference. Okay, maybe giving a talk, maybe chairing a session. And the reason I mention this, apart from trying to frame recognition as sort of exemplified by professional registration as part of the technician commitment, is these sorts of activities can actually enhance your CPD going forward. The final 2 are career development and sustainability. So this can be, for example, attending courses through licensed bodies. It can actually be utilizing materials that I've mentioned that I've put together, or other materials. So these are all things that actually help you in your career and hopefully will help you progress. So if I now try and break down the benefits of professional registration into different categories. Well, the first one, which has been mentioned at the beginning, is validation of skills. Clearly, if you fill out quite a detailed competency report, looking at different aspects of your jobs that I've mentioned, culminating in the award of your professional register, which gives you post-nominals, RSci Tech, RSci or CSci, that is public validation of your skills, and that can actually leads to peer recognition, okay? Because this is something that obviously you can display after your name. Generally speaking, it's been reported to me by people that actually put through a lot of technicians through professional registration. It can build confidence. The act of actually filling out that competency form, reflecting on what you've done, putting pen to paper and actually achieving your post-nominals can be a big confidence boost, particularly for people that are maybe not used to getting awards. And what's often been reported is that that confidence building can then actually lead to those same people who hitherto had basically done their job 9 to 5 and then gone home and maybe watched Coronation Street. They then think, you know what, that was actually
11 o'clock.
That was quite enjoyable. And basically I can do this. This is a 30-page report that I've put together talking about my own work, okay, culminating in these post-nominals. And it basically instills confidence. And often you find that people that become professionally registered start to get much more involved in other things in their workplace, including vocational training. Okay, it's a spur to confidence. We're going to talk a little bit about career development and CPD in the context of professional registration. Okay. But what I'd say is that as a result of becoming professionally registered, gaining your post-nominals, okay, joining a licensed body, okay, which networks you with that licensed body and other people in it, it can lead to outside prospects and society engagements. So, for example, take myself. I became professionally registered. As a result of doing that, I then basically trained to become an assessor. I trained to become an assessor. I started to participate in other activities, and that resulted in my mentoring position with the Science Council, giving these workshops on behalf of the Science Council, and also my elected licensed body at the time, the IST. That then in turn led to opportunities to present and become involved, for example, with Midlands Innovation Talent. It's why I'm sitting here today. So whilst in the short term, your professional registration may not lead to career development opportunities, it can actually enhance your opportunities outside. And as I've said, that is actually bona fide CPD that can be used to renew your professional registration. I mentioned job prospects, and in some organisations, I won't mention who they are, there is actually now, and clearly this is the aspiration in general, the idea is that you become professionally registered, you get your post-nominals, well, so what? It's a lot of work. It's got to mean something. So the overall aspiration is that more and more organisations will recognise this post-nominal in the way that PhDs are a basis for career progression for academics in universities and increasingly industry. And it may have implications for career progression within your current framework, within your current job. That is taking off, and things will only get better, to coin a term, going forward. But in the majority of cases, that actually hasn't come to fruition yet. That said, if you work for certain organisations, government-funded organisations like BBSRC, the Environment Agency, there are already moves afoot to actually translate post-nominals into putative improved career benefits. That said, there is one seminal benefit that applies now. Many of us change jobs during the course of our career, okay? And let me just say unequivocally that if you are applying in the current world that we live in, within the UK framework, where the technician commitment is becoming rolled out, and as a concomitant of that, professional registration is increasingly important, if you cannot demonstrate that you're working towards professional registration, that may actually impair your job prospects. So let me put that in specific terms. It's not uncommon now when you apply for a technical job for the job advert, and I'll show two in a minute, to actually specifically ask for professional registration or working towards that. And working towards that is actually joining a licensed body. So if you join a licensed body today, a priori, it's an indication that you will go on, if you like, and complete the race. You will use that membership of the licensed body, apart from involving yourself with the licensed body in ways I've touched upon, to actually become professionally registered. Joining a licensed body is an integral part of professional registration. Okay. I'm going to give you one example now, two examples, should I say, to talk about the benefits apart from validation of skills. I know of one line manager who actually said to me, they've been interviewing for 30 years, and they said to me that if an application for a job comes across their desk where the candidate is, let's say, RSI, they look upon that much more favourably because it demonstrates to them, in the absence of other information, that they are a dynamic individual. I'll mention one other example, and that's the fact that a PhD is not a substitute for, let's say, a CSI. If you are somebody with a PhD that wants to stay technical, I would say that becoming, let's say, an RSI or a CSI is still beneficial. And I'll give you a specific example of that. I know another manager that basically had a job where it was a two-horse race. It came down to somebody with a CSI but without a PhD, and somebody with basically a PhD, conversely, and no professional registration. The job actually went to the person with the CSI because their competency form indicated that they could hit the ground running. Clearly, a PhD is basically mastering particular academic knowledge and associated skills, but it wasn't obvious to this particular manager that this individual could hit the ground running. And that was obvious, however, for the second candidate based on the exposition within their competency form. So this is really just to show you that these are two job adverts, and you'll notice that professional registration with an accredited professional body, the first one, is mentioned. And here it talks about, where are we? Somewhere here, a technical registration such as RSI Tech would be desirable. So these are two jobs from 2 years ago. Working towards that goal, as I say, is really synonymous today with joining a licensed body, which you can do independent of becoming professionally registered. And there are benefits, as I've talked about, to joining a licensed body and becoming involved with them. Or alternatively, you can join a licensed body as part and parcel of your online CAP application. So these are just some buzzwords that people talk about in relation to what they have actually experienced by becoming professionally registered. So I'll let you have a quick look at those: networking, validation, influence, professionalism, recognition. And this is something that was put together or commented on by somebody, Laura Grout, that I actually mentored. And as a result of becoming a CSI, she has actually experienced basically an expedited career progression. And that's partly based on the sort of exigencies of where she works. But it's also the fact that, as Laura said, it boosted her confidence, which led me to apply for new opportunities. So that's another aspect of professional registration. It's not just about embracing other courses. It could be that you feel, you know what, I'm doing a lot. I've achieved this thus far. I will actually apply within my own organization or outside for a better job. And this is actually a link to a blog. If you achieve this, if you get a copy of this course, where Laura talks about her own experiences at the Sangha being a CSI autobiographically. And this is really from, or should I say, this is from an apprentice that talks about maintaining professional development, keeping on top of what you do, thinking about your competency form and renewing your competency form and what you need to do that, perhaps keeping a log of things you want to do or are doing, okay, and using that as part of your CPD to inform your professional registration, obtaining and renewal thereof going forward. I think at this point, what I'd like to do is actually break off until 11:15. Does that sound reasonable, Sarah?
Sorry, I keep trying to speak when I've got my mute on. Yes, that sounds great, Lawrence.
So if we all aim to come back at 11:15, and then the second part of the talk is really synonymous with defining the three registers that I've talked about, and then exploring a little bit the mechanics of the actual application, Common Application Portal or CAP.
Thanks, Lawrence. See you in a few minutes.
Yeah. Oh,
Lawrence, just while I can see you're there, I just had another question. You were mentioning the case of the two competing applications, PhD versus CSI, and were pointing out that the employer could see the from the competence report that the CSI applicant will be able to hit the ground running. Does this imply that the competency report can be accessed by others, e.g. future employers? I had so far assumed that the application documents were only seen by applicant and assessor. So that's a good question. Just once we start again at 3:50. Oh, you're on mute. Once we start again at 11:15. Oh, you're still on mute. Let me see if I can. Yeah, you'll need to take yourself off mute, Lawrence. It's just the second one from the right.
Right.
Yep, perfect.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. Can you see the slide?
Yep.
Steps to professional registration.
Yes, yep.
Okay, briefly before I start, because I think we're due to resume. No, the competency form is a confidential document, and the person I was referring to was actually the person hiring for the job. So they were looking at that candidate and their competency form. Now, let me answer that again. I'm gonna leave that one. I'm going to think about that and come back to that in a second, because I think I understand where that person's going. But I'll come back to that in a second. Is that okay?
Yeah, I think that'll be fine. I mean, any of these you might want to answer. But essentially what you're saying is it's not a public document. It would only be able to be accessed. So maybe the candidate forwarded the recruiter.
Yes, it could be that they forwarded it. Yeah, that's thrown me a little bit. It's a very interesting question. Okay, so let me think about that in the background as I go along. And let me also just say that at the formal close of this session, if you're agreeable, Sarah, I am prepared to stay on for a few minutes if there are any burning questions before we actually all go.
Perfect.
All right. So let me resume. So this second part is really about delineating the registers and a little bit about the mechanics of CAP, the Common Application Portal, the online Science Council portal for actually applying for professional registration. What I'm going to do, however, before I delve into those two things, is just give you a sort of schematic of steps involving steps applying to putting in your application for professional registration. So the first one is decide which register is right for you. So what I'd say is before you even apply, there are certain things that you should have done. The first is that application itself, commencing the application, presupposes one, you know which register you are, okay? And there's actually a lot on the different licensed body websites, in addition to the Science Council website itself, that can guide you. But as I've said, and I will reiterate again, if you're not sure by the end of this session, if you want to send me your CV, many people do, I'm fairly adept at giving them a quick answer. You need to know which register you are, because that determines the particular sort of portal that you will go into. So there are 3 sub-portals, if you like, for the 3 respective registers. I would also say that before commencing your application, make sure that you have a copy in rough and it's in a polished version, but we'll come on to that. So an integral part of professional registration application is selecting a licensed body, and I'll clarify the licensed bodies in a second. That's the other thing that I'll do in this second half. Select your competency examples. This is something that we delve into in great detail in next Monday's session, but suffice to say at this juncture, and going back to something I said earlier, to sort of give you an overall framework, don't just think about your technical work. Think about other things you do, be that training other people, being organising labs, being maintaining a financial budget, stock taking and ordering, maintaining equipment, and liaising with engineers when the equipment breaks down. In A, for example, you could talk about not just one aspect of application of knowledge and understanding in terms of an operating procedure is maybe updates to the instrument protocols themselves, not just what you do at the bench or outside in the field. Okay, these are all subject matters that are fodder for the 5 competencies. Okay, so think about it in the round. The other thing I'll say at this juncture is be proactive rather than reactive. What do I mean by that? Sit down, make a list of the different things you do and how they might map to your competencies, and I can help you with that. Also think about things that you may want to do in the future that will enhance your competency form. And this is not a timed assessment. If you want to spend 6 months putting your portfolio of evidence, your particular work-based scenarios together, then do that, okay? And then commit yourself to actually sitting down and applying. So compose your competency statements as a rough draft and do it in a way that non-specialist assessors, remember there are 2 working blind, will understand. And in terms of putting together what I refer to as a competent competency answer, this is something that I break down in next Monday's session. So you have your polished prose, okay, which maybe a mentor within your own organization has looked at, maybe I've looked at, and I say it passed muster. So you copy and paste that into the actual online application. Are your prose effective and pertinent? And we'll talk more about STAR next week. Situation, task, action, result. Result means as an output. So select an example where it actually validates what you're talking about. And we'll break this down in much more detail in next Monday's session and then submit. And usually those 2 assessors will come back to you in 3 or 4 weeks. If they concur on the competencies and the sub-competencies thereof, it's a quick process. In other words, if it's a well-written competency form, you'll have a decision within 3 weeks. It tends to be longer than that if one or more of the assessors disagrees on a particular sub-competency, because it only takes one basically failure of a sub-competency that we'll talk more about next Monday for the form to be bounced back to you. But this is not an exam, okay? It's not a pass-fail. What will happen is the competency report will come back to you and there will be pertinent comments from the assessor saying how you need to rewrite in general terms a particular competency that isn't quite up to scratch. And then you get an opportunity to submit, and you get an opportunity to resubmit twice. So I keep referring to the fact that there are 3 registers commensurate with experience and responsibility. So let me try and delineate those at this stage. So an RSI tech is not a rookie, okay? They're usually someone with 1 to 2 years experience, and they can actually follow a protocol. So they're not a rookie. They've been trained to generate data independently, okay? So they can independently generate data by following an SOP they've been trained in. And they can therefore, as someone who is competent, they can generate consistent and accurate data. They may, however, as a technician, as an RSI tech, they may actually be housekeeping. They may be running the lab, maintaining pieces of equipment, not just for themselves, but for others, okay? So as I say, these are all scenarios that can be included, that can be passed into the 5 competencies. And how you do that is up to you. And moreover, if you want to take one particular theme and use it for different sub-competencies, that's fine. How you put the form together, as I've said, is entirely of your volition, as long as it meets the bootstrap statements against the objectives of the competency. Okay, so what you need to demonstrate as an RSci Tech in your competency form is that you can generate data and that you can actually expound the science briefly behind the data. So you have a good understanding of what underpins your technical activities, in addition to the other things we touched upon, like organization, etc. within the lab. Okay. However, the one thing that you probably won't need to demonstrate as an RSci Tech, or in fact you don't, is based on that limited experience, you don't need to demonstrate that you can actually improvise on a standard operating procedure. Okay, use a non-standard method to solve a problem, to circumvent a roadblock. Okay, that's something that maybe you need to demonstrate as an RSci. Okay, so I think I've sort of encapsulated RSci Tech. An RSci is really an extension of RSci Tech. It's somebody usually with 2 to 5 years experience, and not only can they follow a standard operating procedure, they can optimize on that standard operating procedure. Okay, as part and parcel of that, by virtue of their extra experience, in addition to lab housekeeping or lab management, they may be involved in training others in terms of COSH and actually the prosecution of an operating procedure, okay, carrying out a particular technique. So that training is obviously synonymous with specialist knowledge, imparting specialist knowledge. That, for example, is part of competency C. But normally, as an RSci with 2 to 5 years experience, it may be that you're training others in the use of COSH, training them in follow a standard operating procedure, safe working practice within your environment. And also you're able to demonstrate that you can actually use that additional knowledge to actually carry out a fix for a data block based on a set of samples that haven't quite given you the data you want by following the standard operating procedure per se. Okay, you can improvise on that procedure. A CSci is someone with 5+ years work, and there are really 2 categories of chartered scientists. The first is a team leader. So it may be that they're involved in lab infrastructure. They manage teams. Maybe they're responsible for budgeting and finance. Maybe they liaise with people outside the labs. Maybe the labs or their work environment is being renovated. So they deal in that case with non-specialists in the context, let's say, of competency C. They'll deal with estates and services. Okay, so it's a broader remit. Generally, they're not performing wet-based bench science, whether in industry or in a lab. Okay. However, that's not to say that a CSci doesn't do that. And it may be that they're responsible for working up new technical methods in the lab by drawing on their own years of experience, doing literature searches to update their methods. That falls into A and competency D. But in addition to that, or should I say, there are 2 types, therefore, of CSci. There is the traditional team leader involved with managing teams and doing things within the lab as a whole, maybe updating the water system. And then there's a CSci that actually isn't a team leader. Okay, so what does it mean to be a CSci? How are you eligible to be a CSci in the absence of managing teams? Okay, it's about supervision rather than training per se. So let me make that dichotomy. For an RSci, if you are training someone, you need to demonstrate that you can train them in the exigencies of the operating procedure and safe practice associated with an understanding of COSH. Okay, that is training, and that is something you demonstrate as an RSci. If you're not a team leader, okay, it's still possible, my case as an example, to apply for CSci. So how do you do that? Well, a type of management.
Oh, Lawrence, you've frozen. Let's hope he comes back. Right, Lawrence, I don't know if you can hear me, but it's probably going to be a good idea for you to leave and come back. going to just stop the recording.